For those who don't know me, my name is Ashlyn, and I am one of the co-founders for Grandstand Action Together here in South Carolina. And today we're talking about one of my favorite topics. So we were talking about prison abolition and prison reform and the prison industrial complex. And we've got Dr. Jennifer Schlosser back. She was with us last summer, and she has been just very busy doing her work, which I will let her tell you a little bit about before we get into the questions.
Thank you, Ashlyn. I'm happy to be back doing a live for Grandstand Action Together. You guys are amazing, and I always love having these conversations because they're really important. So I'm a professor at Coastal Carolina University, and I've been doing research in prisons for the last 15 years of my career. I have a PhD in sociology, and my area of focus is in criminology, but specifically in prison. So I do a lot of work directly with people who are incarcerated. I am actually teaching a class in our local detention facility, where I bring coastal students who are enrolled at the university into our detention facility in Conway. And they have a class with 15 students who are just like them, except they are incarcerated. And so it's really important to me to kind of have these conversations about reform and abolition and how we can, kind of try to work on these big issues that we're facing. So I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. I just wanted to bring up real quick, you have edited and written 2 books.
Yeah.
So, and one of them just came out this past year. Is that right?
Okay. Yeah, so the latest book is called Prison Stories, Women Scholars' Experiences Doing Research Behind Bars. And that is a book that I am the editor of. And it is a compilation basically of chapters written by women who have done research in prisons over the last several decades of our careers. And we just really talk about how gender matters when you're a prison researcher, how gender matters when you are working with primarily men who are incarcerated in prison, and what some of those issues are. And they really have some incredible stories. And it was, the idea behind the book was so that young women who are coming up doing their PhDs, wanting to do research in prison, would be able to have sort of a touchstone or a guide from their elders who have been there before.
That's awesome. Yeah, the idea behind that is wonderful. And I will put a link in the comments for people who want to check it out. And periodically, everybody, I will be looking at the comments. If you have questions, I will ask Jenny those questions when we get to them. So we've got a couple planned. It's like very broad with things you start with. So really, what is the idea behind prison abolition and the movement?
So I feel like this is the terms prison abolition, I think, are difficult for some people. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes when people who don't know what something means or what something is or what the real premise behind something is, they hear words like abolition and prison put together, and it can sound very, very scary. And I get why that would sound scary. I think to people who aren't aware of what the movement is really about, it sounds like those 2 words put together might sound like, prison abolitionists want to close every prison right now, open the doors and let everyone out who has ever been convicted of any type of crime ever, and, just let's see what happens. And that's not at all what the prison abolition movement is. Right. So really, the prison abolition movement is about the idea that as a society, we can and should be working toward a moment, a situation, a change that would render prisons obsolete. So we recognize that we're not there yet because we have for centuries created this carceral state, a state of punishment, where when someone does something wrong in our society, our first instinct, our first thing to do is to punish them for whatever it was that they did. Our first reaction is not to help them, it is to punish them. And so the prison abolitionist movement isn't about opening the gates to all the prisons and letting everyone out. It's about reforming the way that we look at our fellow humans and the way that we look at why crime happens and then how we respond to crime and to people doing things that we as a society don't approve of. And so there are definitely ways that we can get to that, but it does require a fairly significant shift in thinking for us to get to the point where we would be able to render prisons unnecessary in our society. But I do think it's possible. Sure. So
do you think reforming the prison system, maybe closing private prisons, getting rid of, the whole the issue with bail, so some people are just locked up because they can't pay their bail money, is a step towards abolition? Or do you think that some people, and I know some people may feel this way, that reform kind of in any topic, not just the specific topic, that reform might kind of like cut the legs out from underneath like the abolition movement?
Yeah, I can actually see both sides of it. I do think that any type of reform that you make within a system that is as dysfunctional and broken as our criminal justice system currently is simply putting a Band-Aid on it. I don't see that that's actually reforming anything. I see that that is plugging holes where things are leaking. Wow. And I don't know that that's gonna really make any long-lasting or significant change to the way that we do things. So I definitely get the argument about how if you just continue pushing reform after reform after reform, it doesn't actually get to the heart of the problem, which is that broken and dysfunctional system that we've been operating on. So I think both things need to happen simultaneously. I think you can have prison reforms. I think you can currently, in the present moment, make conditions better for people who do become entangled in the criminal justice and correction systems. So I think you can create reforms that make it better for people who have to be in that system anyway. But I also think at the same time, on the other side of it, you've also got to be campaigning for and working toward and doing the hard work of abolition, in the sense that we render prisons unnecessary in our society. So I think it's both. I don't think you'll get very far trying to do either one on its own, because you're gonna get kind of hit with a lot of things that would slow it down. But there have been abolitionist movements throughout our country's history that have been fairly successful. Sometimes, we can see the way that a movement has evolved to simply change the way that people look at a thing, at oppression or slavery or something like that, where those things actually still exist today. We just call them something else so that we can feel better, that we're no longer doing them, but we actually are. So the short answer is both reforms and work toward a real abolitionist movement, I think, are necessary, and that's what's going to get us there.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I personally agree with you. I think that they go hand in hand. I know that there's a lot of arguments that I've heard from some people who find themselves on like the left side of the political spectrum that we have here in the United States, where it's, whether it's climate change or whether it's, like raising the minimum wage. Some of them feel like if you don't go all the way, then it's not enough. And it's just, it could be a hard conversation to navigate. But I think even, we have to get people on board with the whole idea in the first place, I think that's a great point that you just made, actually, that if people are afraid that we don't go all the way with something, that we're not doing it. But I would argue to that, you can't go all the way with something until you prepare the field for it, right? So if I'm baking a cake, right, and I
don't do well at this, so let's pretend I know how to bake. I would get all my ingredients together. I would mix it all up. I would have my cake. I would pour it into the pans and I'd be like, yes, I'm ready. I'm like super pumped for this badass cake I just made. And then I look and I'm like, oh, I forgot to preheat the oven. So you have to prepare the playing field to be ready to accept and be able to nurture the big changes that you want to make. And that takes time and work. And I think the reality sometimes gets, I don't want to say forgotten or overlooked, but I think it gets pushed to the side a little bit because we have such big ideas and we are so passionate about things, but you can't just skip steps, right? Like you have to prepare yourself and you have to prepare other people for accepting and understanding and being a fully functional system once it's there. Yeah. So I think that was an excellent point. For sure.
Yeah, I like that analogy. I definitely like that. I think that's easy to grasp for people too.
My cake. Yeah.
Yeah, it's totally, because how many times do you, like, I always forget to preheat the oven. It's a perfect analogy. So something I kind of want to ask, that wasn't what we had kind of talked about, just can you tell us more about what you're doing with your class? Because I think that a lot of people will find that very intriguing, and like, how do they interact with each other? Or, you know, how do they all feel about it? And kind of like, what is the end goal for that?
So the jail class at J. Reuben Long. So my original plan got shot. COVID just kind of messed everything and everybody up. So the original plan has always been to take my students, and I've gone through significant training, educator training on teaching in jails and prisons. And so I was really pumped, really prepared, ready. I had all my syllabi were done. I had all my materials. And I was going to take 15 coastal students into J. Reuben Long Detention Center once a week for 3 hours. And I would have 15 incarcerated students. And it would literally be, you know, I would try to make the situation no different from if we were in a classroom on campus, that everyone is treated equally, that everyone is assumed to have, you know, to want to be there, to want to learn, to be capable of learning, and to be involved and interested. I told the person that I'm working with at J. Reuben, actually, he said, no, I can get like, you know, 20 guys if you want that. And I said, no, I need this to be voluntary. This is not a thing I want anyone to be forced into. And of course, the question of what's voluntary in prison is problematic anyway, because nothing is really voluntary when you're incarcerated. But I said, I want this to be something that people want to actually participate in. You know, this isn't a punishment for them. This is an opportunity. And if they feel, you know, like they want to do that, then I welcome them into my class. COVID happened, and so we had to stop all of that. So my next plan was, okay, well, we'll just do it on Zoom, right? Like we did everything on Zoom last year. Well, in jails and prisons across the country, COVID ran rampant because we don't protect people that we incarcerate. And so they didn't get vaccines, they didn't have social distancing, there weren't masks, nothing. And so COVID really ran through you know, the incarcerated population in a really serious way. So they said, well, we can't even have them gather in the same room because of COVID. So we ended up having to sort of backpedal a little bit. And what happened the first time I taught this class, which was last year, was we had to go like full analog. We had to go way back and say, okay, we have no technology. What do we do? So my students actually exchanged handwritten letters with the incarcerated students, and everyone used a pseudonym just to be safe, and also because it was the first time I did it, had run this class, but it turned out, I think, better than I could have hoped. The end project that I gave my students for that class, my coastal students, was I don't care what you do, I just want all of you to work together to create a final project that we can showcase what you learned in this class. And so some of the things that I had them reading and consuming were media that literature, books, things like that, that had been written about inmates, media that had been written for inmates, and media that had been written by inmates. And so they got those 3 levels of literature and information by doing those external readings. And then they incorporated what they learned through that into their handwritten letters. Their final project was really amazing. And it's on Facebook somewhere. I can link it if you want, but they created a video. My students created a video of themselves holding up quotes from the letters that they actually received from the incarcerated students that are literally in the same city. They're in Conway. And they were quotes like, I'm excited about my future. It's nice to know that people out there care about me. It's good to have a friend, things like that. And the end result was that my students saw that they have much more in common with the people who they were communicating with than they ever thought that they did. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, is the key to fostering empathy and compassion for our fellow humans, is seeing our similarities. And so this class was a success. I really, really wanted to go again this year, but they just had another COVID outbreak. So we are going to have to, again, kind of regroup and figure it out. I think I'm going to be able to get some technology so that we can do some one-on-one Zooming this time. And I'm excited about it. Yeah.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I don't know if you only teach this class in the fall or the spring, but like maybe hopefully next year you can actually do it the way that you want to do it.
I'm so ready. Yeah, I'm really excited. I hope we can. Yeah.
That's awesome. I don't know if you've ever crossed paths with Hyman from Coker University. He taught in I guess it was a medium security men's prison in California for a few years, and then he has been at Coker ever since. And he never really he like mentions it sometimes, but he doesn't really like talk about it too much. So I feel like he would be probably like really intrigued with what you're doing.
I really feel like I've come across that name somewhere. I'm sure that I have.
He ran for Congress here in the 7th in 2018, and then he's been on a couple of our lives. Like he was on the Palestine live stream that I did, and he was on that climate change one that we just did as well. So he bounces around, but yeah, that would be probably something that we should just get all of the sociology professors together and to talk about that, because that's really cool. That's wonderful. So kind of like leading into the next question, background on my parents both worked at state psychiatric hospitals in Pennsylvania, and they closed virtually all of those down at some point. I don't know how many are left open now, but my dad retired about a year before it closed down. My mom didn't, and so she transferred to a different one, and then she actually took a position on like I guess the sex offender unit of the psychiatric hospital. And so when people mention prison abolition, they always bring up rapists. And so I think you and I both know that most of the time rapists don't even see a day in jail, let alone prison. But do you think that it's possible to rehabilitate people right now in our current climate versus like in this ideal future who have committed like violent acts, versus the petty things that people get locked up for that are harming nobody?
Okay, that's a tough question because it's comparing it to the current climate versus my ideal like utopian future of prisons not existing.
One or both. It's
okay. Well, first of all, I don't think anyone is beyond redemption. I think everyone is capable of changing who they are as a person and doing things differently. I think we don't have a system in place that allows that. I think and this is actually Angela Davis's argument for prison abolition, is the problem is with our attitude as a society that that once we hear that someone has done something bad, that is it. In our minds, that is it. We are out for revenge, and that is all we can see. We are angry. We want them to suffer. And we hope, and when I say we, I mean, as a society, this is sort of our mentality, We hope that they just get locked up and stay there forever until they die. And we write them off as no longer a thing we have to worry about. And I think that gets away from understanding people as like actual humans, complex humans who have experiences and who are of course capable of changing and being and acting different and doing different things. So yes, I think that if we're going to lump everyone who has been convicted of a violent crime as unsavable or unhelpable, I think that's we are stopped in our tracks from the jump. There's no going past that. And so Angela Davis's argument again is that we have to change our mindset that that people are disposable, because right now they are. That is what we are doing. We are simply disposing of the people in our society who we have deemed incapable of anything other than the crime that they committed. And I think that's a problem. You mentioned earlier state mental health facilities, and I think that's really interesting. There are many reasons why we have such a huge prison population right now. The war on drugs, all kinds of racist laws like 3 strikes and indeterminate sentencing, things like that. But really one of the main reasons is because the United States government has, in the correction system, created its largest mental health provider. It has, we literally have closed 99% of the state-run and federally run mental health institutions. And that really started, it started in the 80s. And we kind of see the effects of it still continuing. So I actually have a statistic on that. There are fewer than 80 left in the country. And I don't know the exact number, but I know that it's fewer than 80 because 80 is the number of Indian reservation jails, military prisons, and state psychiatric hospitals that are left. That's it. There are 80, as opposed to 7,000 other types of correctional facilities like jails and prisons, including private prisons. So we have fewer than 80 mental health facilities left and 7,000 correctional institutions that have replaced them. And so, I think just in that number, you can see how that shift in thinking about people as that there are ways that we can help them. There are ways that we can integrate them back into society to help them, do whatever is necessary to hold them up and give them what they need to be successful, has really gone away. And now it's truly just lock them up and throw away the key mentality. And that, I think, is a simplistic way of thinking. And I would challenge anyone who has that viewpoint to really stop and consider, why do you have that viewpoint? And what would happen if we did it differently? Just what would happen? And here's the question: what's the worst that can happen, right? So this is where I hear people ask that question that you asked. Well, what about rapists and serial killers? And everyone really thinks that this is like the punch in the gut to the prison abolitionist movement, and that there's no answer to this. This is also when they think that all we want to do is open all the jails and prisons. Okay. So what about the serial killers and murderers? I make a very careful point when I use statistics to only use them from things like the Uniform Crime Report that the FBI puts out, from the Bureau of Justice Statistics run by our government, and from the Bureau of Prisons. Other organizations and other websites have done great studies on it, but I always want to avoid that person who believes that anything that is not a government statistic is somehow biased and you're lying to me, right? Yeah. So all of my stats come directly from .gov government sites and reports and analyses. According to the FBI, serial murder accounts for less than 1% of all murders committed in a given year. Less than 1%. People think serial killers are a big problem. and they're just not. Listen, my students in my criminology classes get really mad at me because they honestly take a criminology class in college because they want to learn about serial killers. Like, that's why they sign up for the class, right? They're like, when are we going to talk about Dahmer and, you know, all of that? And I'm like, okay, look, here's the thing. You're going to get really mad at me, but it's so insignificant a thing, serial murder. It doesn't even warrant me spending a day of my lecture on it. That's how insignificant it is in reality, right? Less than 1% of all murders committed in a given year are the result of serial murder. And by the way, serial murder just means that you killed more than one person with time in between those killings. It's not all indicative of the Jeffrey Dahmers or the Ted Bundys that we see, you know, in the media. I lecture my students on that day that they want to learn about serial killers. I lecture them about the real problem in romanticizing serial killers, like we have done in our society. You can turn on the television right now, and I guarantee you there's a show talking about serial killers. No. It's just not that big of a thing. And because when you're confronted with something so many times, you begin to think that it's real, right? You begin to think that it's common, that it must be everywhere because we hear all about serial killers. It simply isn't. So for people who would argue, what about the serial killers? Okay, that's fine. We can have a prison for serial killers. For Jeffrey Dahmer and he got killed in prison, but Ted Bundy's dead too. He got executed. Whoever's left, that's fine. They can stay.
Yeah.
Right. In terms of rapists and sexual assault, listen to this number, listen to this statistic. We know that rape is underreported, and we know that it's definitely under prosecuted. But 13% of the people in state prisons are serving time for rape or sexual assault. 13%, that's 165,000 people. That's it. 165,000 people. Again, of course, sexual assault happens, and it happens more often than we arrest people for it happening. Of course, it's a real thing that we need to know about, and we need to protect victims. We need to protect our citizens, but we're not spending the time and resources and money protecting victims. We're not spending the time and resources and money protecting, people from potentially, being a victim of sexual assault. We are spending our time and money and resources on building more prisons so that when we catch a rapist, we have somewhere to put them. And that's the important shift to think about, is if we reallocate our resources and actually take care of the people who are out of prison, we would have less of a need for prison in the first place.
Yeah.
I have more to say on this, but do you want me to pause?
No, you're fine. I think that is all a very good point. And please continue. It's when we talk about state hospitals, so many of them have been closed. Like you said, there are 80 or less in the entire country. It's kind of disheartening to know. Like, I know so many people who have worked in them back in Pennsylvania just because of my parents, and it's disheartening to know that so many of them do not believe that some people in the state hospitals, like specifically the sexual offender unit, because it was a separate unit, could be rehabilitated.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, I ask myself, well, then, why are you in this? Like, why is this job for you then? Like, why are you working here? Why did you take this position? So yeah, I agree with you. And I think that we don't have programs, even those state hospitals, like, they weren't sufficient.
Right. They were underfunded anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't have anything to help people get kind of therapy, resources to whatever medications,
treatment, therapy. Yep. All of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, go ahead and keep on. You're on a roll.
I am really on a roll. I know. I get real excited about this, but I love the argument because they just think they've got it locked down. And it's like, no, but look at the numbers, look at the actual facts, right? And again, this is why I really do think it's important for someone who, like me, as an educator or a researcher, to use statistics that everyone kind of agrees are as accurate as possible. Although, you really can't 100% trust what you see on government websites anyway, these days, but it's not from, for instance, the ACLU's website. These are literally just numbers that the FBI puts out for the public to read. And so I think that's why it's important to use these numbers, because it is just right there. And a little bit of research is all it takes to kind of see how some of this stuff is shaking out. So I think a counter to that argument, and I don't actually endorse this. This is not what I would like to happen or what I would like to see happen, but an interesting thought experiment is what we'll do here. And this is for, again, the people who are worried about all these violent criminals that they think are out there. If we took all of the people who have been convicted of violent crimes, okay? Now, the majority of the people who have been convicted of violent crimes in both state and federal prison were actually convicted of robbery. So not murder, not sexual assault, not rape, not aggravated assault, but robbery, which this is what I teach in my classes. Robbery legally is the use or a threatened use of a weapon or use of violence or the threatened use of violence to take something from someone. So here's what's interesting, and this is the example I give in class. I could walk into a bank and put my finger in my pocket and have it look like a gun, but not actually have a gun on me, and stick my finger in my pocket and say to the teller, give me all the money in your drawer. And technically, legally, I could absolutely 100% be arrested for and charged with robbery, even though I never said I'm going to kill you, even though I never had a gun on me, even though I never actually made any direct threat or had a weapon. That is how broad the definition of that particular crime is, and it is classified as a violent crime. So it is the most common violent crime for which people are incarcerated right now. In the United States, there are 1.4 million people in prison right now, 2.3 million people confined overall. That includes jails and juvenile detention centers. But just in prisons, federal and state prisons, there's 1.4 million people incarcerated. 726,000 of those 1.4 million people are serving time for violent crimes. Okay. So let me just back up for a second. 726,000 people right now are serving time in a state or federal prison for a violent crime, for being convicted of a violent crime, right? They got convicted of a violent crime. The largest prison in the United States is Angola Prison, which is a Louisiana State Penitentiary, and it holds 6,300 prisoners. On any given day. It's the largest prison that we have. And so if we look at Angola as we have the potential to hold 6,300 people at one time, and there are 726,000 people who are now in prison for being convicted of a violent crime, that means that we would only need 115 prisons total to incarcerate them, not 7,000. So if your argument is what about violent people, that's fine, but look at the numbers. If we go on this premise that okay, fine, let's just incarcerate violent convictions, we still only need 115 prisons. We don't need 7,000.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Obviously, the idea is not to reduce the amount of bodies that we have in prisons with the amount of prisons that there are. I mean, clearly that's not the goal.
Right.
I mean, you would think that any country that, props itself up like our country does would want to reduce the amount of people incarcerated, just because I feel like that would speak to the health of our society, but that's obviously not what we as a country care about.
Wouldn't you think so? The fewer people we have incarcerated, doesn't that just look better? we have fewer people committing crimes because our country is so great or whatever, right? Yeah. And the 1.4 million is literally just in prisons. 2.3 million is including jails and juvenile centers, but the bigger number actually is 6.3 million. And 6.3 million is the number of people that we have under the supervision of the criminal justice system in some way. So that is either incarcerated or on house arrest or electronic monitoring, probation or parole. Yeah. So it's 6.3 million people. I don't know who hears that and thinks, oh, that seems normal. Like, that seems okay. Yeah, I know. It's hard. And it's sometimes it gets exhausting because I feel like I have to teach this information brand new every time I talk to somebody about what I do. And that can actually get really exhausting, but it's like, you have to just keep giving the information and hoping that at some point the people start to listen and understand that what we're doing, that something's broken here, something's wrong, right? There's got to be a better way to do this. I don't think that it's opening every prison right now and just letting everybody out. But I do think it's drastically rerouting the resources that we pump into prison and the carceral state back into our communities so that we create less of a need for prisons in the first place.
Right. No, yeah. I think that makes perfect sense to me. I feel like that has to make perfect sense to the people in power and the people in charge, but I feel like they just don't care.
Oh, let me tell you why. You know why, Ashlyn. You know why. They first, either they don't care, or the people in power, the politicians that we have running our country, are literally profiting off of human incarceration. Please listen to me when I tell you this is not some insane conspiracy theory that I am making up. Truly, the politicians in our country have financial investments in things like private prisons, in contractors that the federal government contracts out to provide services in all of our prisons in states and at the federal level. We have politicians who literally have their hand in the cookie jar and who don't make money if we don't continue to incarcerate people.
This is true. I remember hearing something about that, that there literally are people who are directly profiting, and not even just like campaign donations, like their family, like their husband or their wife or their spouse. They're making actual money from keeping people locked up.
Yep. So why would they want fewer people in prison? They wouldn't. They have an interest, a capital interest. I mean, this is capitalism as it's at its best. This is why we call it the prison industrial complex, right? Because it is our prison system, our correctional system is so entrenched in our capitalist system that it has become inseparable. And now we've got politicians in there who are benefiting from the incarceration of people. And so this is why we have tough on crime bills. This is why we have, hard laws like 3 strikes and things like that coming back up, because it benefits the people in power if we incarcerate more individuals. It's cash for them.
Yeah.
And I say that, and people think I'm making it up, and I so wish that I was. I wish that was just some wild thing that I just dreamt up, but it's not. And you can find this information yourself. This is not like hidden or secret information. You just have to take the time to look for it and educate yourself, rather than simply listening to what a politician tells you is their real agenda,
Yeah, I know. And so you can definitely, anyone watching, you can go to opensecrets.org and find out about like campaign donations, like who takes big pharma money, who takes private prison money. And I'm sure there are numerous articles written about specific people who are, their families have like investments in the prison industry, the private prison industry. I feel like I remember reading one within this past year, and I don't remember who it was about, but I'm almost positive it was a Democrat. But I'm not 100% sure, so I'm not going to say who I'm thinking until I can find it. But we have a question from Damien, and
Oh, Damien, what's up, Damien?
he says, well, he wants to know, what role has the maintenance of Black oppression played in the birth of modern day policing and criminal justice?
Yeah, it's played every role in it, right? It's like, it's again, things that are inseparable. The oppression of Black people and an increasing prison population, like those things are inseparable. Of course, they're related. And I think this is probably Angela Davis's best argument, which is that we believe that we have abolished slavery and that we have eradicated slavery. And so we get to think really highly of ourselves for that. But in reality, all we've done is replace slavery as we knew it with slavery through incarceration. And so when we criminalize things like poverty, that's exactly what we do. When we continue to oppress groups of people who have been historically and systemically oppressed for the duration of our country's history, and we do that by using incarceration and prison as a vehicle to continue that enslavement and that oppression, that we end up exactly where we are right this second with the criminal justice system. So again, it is in the interests of people who have the power to make changes that no changes actually are made.
Yeah.
And so really not much has changed. And I know, again, that seems like a very radical way to think. And if you're not at all familiar with any of this information, it's going to come as something very difficult to hear. But truly, when we incarcerate people of color at a rate many times higher than we should, than their, representation in the population, we have to look at what's happening with that. That's not something that you can ignore. And at some point you have to just stop and say, hey, maybe this is on purpose.
Let's talk about the school to prison pipeline.
Okay.
Because that, so a couple years ago, GSAT and Damien and I don't know if anyone else helped out, but we put on a panel on the school to prison pipeline. And I remember me and Ernest Carson and Damien went on this morning show to promote it. And it was, at the time, it was a radio show that had like a liberal and a conservative.
That's fun.
Yeah, unfortunately, like the liberal guy like didn't do most of the talking. So like, the whole entire time we're just like, getting slammed by someone who wants to be Tommy Lahren, pretty much. So we were digging into this, and I remember the statistic, and it probably has changed. I don't know that anyone has done the research since then, but specifically in Horry County, Black children are 6 times more likely to be expelled than white children. And I think the national average is like 3 times or 4 times. So like Horry County is way above the national average. So really, like if you want to talk about like oppression of Black people with the criminal justice system, like it literally starts in the schools. So I guess how do you feel about that and what needs to change?
Yeah, it literally starts in the schools. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I think there are better people to talk about that particular aspect of the criminal justice system, like Damien, like my department chair, Dr. Bob Jenkott, and Dr. Tiffany Hollis would be a really great person to have on this show, actually. So shout out to you all. Probably a little bit better equipped to talk about it because I'm not super familiar with those statistics that you just mentioned, but I believe it. I believe that. Really, the way to understand the school to prison pipeline is just the idea that we police Black children more than we police white children. And in fact, we don't often police white children. So when I say police, I mean literally police them. We have literal police officers or what are called school resource officers in schools whose only job it is to make sure that no student is doing anything wrong or acting out or being bad. But often what happens is that Black and brown children are targeted much more frequently for acting out or being bad when they're not actually acting out or being bad. When, for instance, we tend to ignore signs and symptoms of mental health issues in Black and brown, not only Black and brown children, but people of color across the board. We tend to ignore issues and signs of mental illness or where they might need mental health services. We tend to ignore things like if a student is falling behind in class, if it's a student of color, what happens most of the time is that teachers and school administrators, if a student is falling behind in class, will sanction them by having them go to a special classroom away from everybody else, or will have them stay after school for detention or whatever it is, right? Will literally remove them from the learning environment in a punitive way, in a way that punishes them, not in a way that says, here, how can I help you? What do you need? But we see that as a disciplinary issue rather than a sign or a symptom of something bigger that's going on that we tend not to look into for students of color. So for instance, if there's issues at home, or for instance, if the child is hungry, maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's why they're falling asleep at their desk. You don't need to punish them for that, right? You need to find out what the real issue is. And so when we enact punitive sanctions on students of color more often than we do white students, that is literally how that school to prison pipeline starts. And there's no there, and it's really difficult to get out of for them.
I think all of that is entirely the case, especially with the mental health issues. Even like, let's say like a child maybe has ADHD, like more leniency or more accommodations may be given to white children who have ADHD versus, a Black child in that same class who also has ADHD. I feel like you don't need to be a parent to know this. You just have to like pay attention to kids or to other people. But like all, behavior is communication. So trying to punish children, whether it's like the parents versus teachers, really, if you just look at what you said, what they need, like what are they trying to communicate? So
there's something bigger going on there. Yeah, exactly. What's really interesting is I don't know, I don't have kids, child free by choice, hashtag child free. So I don't really know what goes on in the in the education system. I don't really know, like, I don't have a kid in it, so I'm not at all like on the pulse of that. But I do remember back in my day, let me just do my old lady thing here for a second, but back in my day, back in the 90s, they had literal classes for students who they deemed behaviorally disordered. They would say that they had behavioral disorders, as if being sleepy or tired or hungry or angry was a behavioral disorder. And they would literally put them in separate classrooms, and they would have special teachers who had to be trained in how to physically protect themselves. Like, they were always constantly ready for a student who they deemed behaviorally disordered to attack them. And I know this because my mother, we called it the BD kids. My mother was a behavioral teacher in the elementary school system for years, and she had to learn all of these techniques. And it was really kind of incredible to watch normal kids get labeled in a certain way, get taken out of the normal classroom environment and put into another one, and then to have people wonder, well, I wonder why they're not doing well in school. You've created a situation where they can't do well in school now.
Right. I feel like that is a huge problem that just further sets them up for struggles and difficulties that, maybe wouldn't have happened otherwise. When you have like one guidance counselor who, no offense to guidance counselors who might be watching this, but that, don't do anything other than like help kids pick where they want to go to college. or are overworked and underpaid and have too many students. Like,
Yep.
you don't have resources for children, and you would think that a school is supposed to set them up to succeed. So you're not giving them these resources. And then also, I mean, look, we can say that's the same thing for prisons. Like, is the goal to rehabilitate people and make sure that they don't come back to prison, or is the goal to beat them down and make them hate life and then not prepare them to come back into society, and then they come back?
And then when they do come back, we reject them anyway. We say, okay, you have to tell us if you're a felon or if you've been, convicted of any crime in the last however many years, and we might not hire you, and whatever. Like, it's a million things. And here's the other thing too. If you're a kid in one of those situations, I'm not saying that that there aren't kids who have issues that need to be handled in a different way. I'm saying that the proportion and the rate at which we attribute those issues to Black and brown children is out of proportion. It's happens too often for it to be accurate. But sometimes I use this term, and I think academics might find it hokey, but I don't care because I like it. It's a term and it actually makes sense here. But sometimes a self-fulfilling prophecy is a real thing, where if you are told from kindergarten, from your little baby days in school, that you have a disorder or there's something wrong with you or you're a bad kid, and you are treated that way, and you are policed by teachers and school resource officers and other parents and things like that, and you were treated like a bad kid, at what point were you able to grow up and think, hey, maybe I'm not a bad kid, right? Maybe they're labeling me in this way and that's not actually who I am. And so it absolutely leads to children not believing that they're capable of anything other than, continuing to act in ways that are problematic for them. So.
Yeah, no, that is definitely it. And even with, like you said, the kids that actually do have behavior issues, what's the line where the school can step in and do something versus like the parents and like outside professionals, like, I don't know that it's necessarily the school's role to, start punishing students for what I would consider like minor behavior problems, which really are just like communication that you can't figure out.
It's communication that you don't know how to listen to. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, that is entirely it. And so relating it like back to the prison system, like, what do you think is lacking in the prison system to just help the incarcerated people?
This is, oh man, that's a big question. Yeah. Pick something. Okay.
You think would benefit them the most first? You know what I mean? Like,
if we're talking reform type stuff or abolition?
Either, or just what you think is the best way to like help rehabilitate people.
Okay. I actually take issue with the word rehabilitation in the first place anyway, because that means that we're starting from a premise that they aren't functional, right? Yeah. That they're entirely at fault in the first place, and that's how they got to prison anyway, is that it's 100% their fault. I challenge anyone right now to think about a bad situation in your life. Think about a time that you did something and you look back on it and you're like, what the hell was I thinking, right? Every single one of us has that. I have many times in my life where I look back now and it's like fully cringe, right? I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. Or how lucky was I that I didn't get into more trouble like that, right? And again, it's not luck, it's privilege, because I'm a white woman. Very few bad things happen to me in terms of the system, right? But I have a lot more resources at my fingertips for things like that. But think about a time in your life when you're like, wow, I can't believe I didn't get caught for that, or I'm glad I didn't get caught, or I'll never do that again, right? And if we all think like that, if you're considering that incident right now in your head, you have to know that you didn't get to that point alone. That there were people with you, around you, that you I'm not talking like accomplices. I'm talking like individuals in your life that helped lead you to that particular moment in time where that thing happened that you now regret or wish hadn't happened. Every single one of us is influenced by the people around us. None of us really make any 100% on our own, by ourselves decisions. We are influenced in some way by the people that we are surrounded by. And so to use the term rehabilitate, I think, is problematic because it assumes that the person was diseased or, there was something wrong or less than about them when that incident happened, and then they went to prison. So what do I think? Sorry, I went off on a little tangent.
No, you're fine. I guarantee you some people did not think about that. So I think that's a good thing to bring up. So what would you say instead of, like rehabilitate or like maybe like prepare for life back in the outside, like society, life outside of a cage? So what would you sub in, I guess? What would you substitute for that?
Wow, if I was queen of the world, okay, and I had like all the money and stuff, I would do so much for this particular question. All right, we have to think back to the cake, right? You can't incarcerate a person for years and do nothing with them, do nothing to help them while they're in there, and then release them and say, don't come back, right? Of course, that's why we have such high recidivism rates of people who have already been incarcerated going back to prison for something. The vast majority of the time, people who have previously been incarcerated and then end up going back to prison go back on a technicality as a violation of their probation or parole from that original crime, not from committing a new crime. So that's another thing to remember. But you can't just have a half-baked cake and say, make the best of it. We have to prepare ourselves and society and our communities on the outside to be ready to receive people coming out of prison in ways that allow us to help them in ways that they actually need to be helped, right? So if someone is coming out of prison, most of the time what happens is that they'll get like $20 and a bus ticket if they're lucky. And they're like, good luck, don't come back. And so I think the one big main thing that I can do if we were talking about how to help people transition from prison back into the community would be to have way more resources poured into community support, community aid, where we actually help this person from the second they step out, even before, right? Even start helping them before they're released. But from the second they step out of prison, and continue to help them and be available to them and make resources available to them that they need on a continual basis until they are ready and able and feel that they're able to be, in society in a way that they want to be. Right. Now, the trick in that is creating a network of resources that doesn't then become another arm of the state. Where we are not custodial supervisors of people who were just released from prison. I don't think that's helpful at all. They have enough of that. I would also, there's so many things, you're gonna have to stop me at a certain point, but I would also do away with the excessive fines and fees that we impose on people. When you're released from prison, in the majority of the time, you're gonna have fines, court fees, lawyers that you have to pay. If you got a lawyer, you're gonna have to pay off your fines, do all these other things, to the point that it truly, the only other option, even if you get a job and are able to make money, you can't pay all your fees and fines. The idea that you could go back to prison for that is daunting enough that people literally, and I don't blame them, but say, screw it, why would I not sell drugs or, do something else? Like I'm trapped. And I think that's what it is. I think we trap them, and we trap them in this cycle of recidivism. And again, that's why that 6.3 million number is actually really significant. We have to look at more than who is currently confined in cages in the United States and look at that 6.3 million people who are under the supervision or purview of the criminal justice system in some way. That's too much. That's too many. And we're clearly doing something wrong when the majority of them recidivate and come back. So I would look for ways that we can ease that transition, but also not become a supervisory, another probation or another parole officer on that end. Yeah.
That sounds like we would need the people in the, working in the prisons, whether it's like the warden or like whoever is in charge of, I guess maybe like a social worker or something. Mm-hmm. Sure is not going to be a prison guard. Mm-hmm. Reaching out to like this imaginary, and maybe this exists somewhere in some city, who knows, like community nonprofit that would start working with someone before they are released to like help accommodate them and provide them with what they may need once they get outside, because some, as and I'm sure as others know, not all these folks have families that can help them, or maybe they do but their family doesn't have money. So what is to become of them, like setting them up for success versus setting them up to just come right back in and fill a bed.
That's exactly what we're doing, though. We are setting them up to come right back. I mean, and it's like a wink and a nod kind of thing, like, hey, don't come back. Of course. Mm-hmm. We know that the majority of people come back, and it's because we don't have the right resources. Mm-hmm. And well, actually we could have the resources, we're just allocating them improperly.
Yes. Yeah. A great point. And we can use that to talk like about anything, like, well, where are we getting money? We have a ton of money, actually. If you look at the budget of the United States, we just send almost all of it to the military instead of investing it into our own communities. Won't go off on that tangent, but
I agree though. Yeah.
Money. We just need to reallocate it. So
I know when people get mad and they're like, well, I don't want to be taxed anymore, blah, 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 blah. Listen, you realize that you're paying for people to be in prison. That's your tax dollars. You say that you don't want your tax money to go to help people for things like welfare and food stamps and all of that. Like, we hear that argument, like, why should my hard-earned money go to pay for other people? Your hard-earned money is currently going to keep people incarcerated right now, and then to keep them coming back. And so you, as an individual, are actually paying for this. I don't understand where people sometimes think the money comes from. Like these are state-run facilities based on tax dollars. Yeah. So
yeah, and even we don't necessarily have to even raise your taxes if we just looked at the little pie and figured out a way to move it around. But really, like, I do not personally think that if we paid a little bit more, but it benefited society instead of, going to dropping bombs on countries in the across the world, it would be a bad thing if we paid a little bit more.
And I think this argument also applies to a lot of other things, like Social Security, for instance. I continue to pay Social Security, and I seriously doubt that I will, by the time I retire, I will see any of it, right? But my dad is 80 years old with Parkinson's disease, and he needs it. And I am more than happy to continue to pay it for people like my dad and other people, right? Even though I know I may not benefit from it. Student loans are another thing. Like, people get mad about, why should we forgive student loans? I had to pay student loans, blah, blah, blah. I've paid my student loans for 10 years and I'm not even close to having them paid off, right? And if tomorrow Biden comes in and says, okay, everyone, except Dr. Schlosser gets their student loans forgiven, I would still be glad for them. So just because I suffered doesn't mean other people should have to too. I think that gets back to our mindset of like, we need to punish people because, bad things have happened to me. And so I want bad things to happen to other people too. So,
yeah. The fact that we have to even like explain the concept of not wishing even on like your enemies, right? Like, bad things is just mind-boggling to me. I don't have any student loan debt. My husband is, I think, paid off his just recently, like, and I would not care if we canceled it for everybody else.
Congrats for you.
Debt, no one should have medical debt. Other things like put people into little boxes and little cages that they can't get out of.
Exactly.
Lorraine just brought something up, and I think we kind of mentioned it, but the way she phrased it, it might just be like a totally different way to take the question.
Okay.
So she said, how about letting all nonviolent offenders out of prison and offer them community-based programs to address issues that got them to allegedly break the law in the first place?
Okay. Yeah, great. Yeah, let's do that. Totally do that. I'm fine with that. You still only need 115 prisons. Like, we did the math. Like, I had a calculator, you guys, and I don't do math. So I'm like, okay, literally how many prisons do we need if we kept everyone who was convicted of a violent crime in prison? And it comes out to 115. So I think that's actually a great suggestion. But that means we also need to then close the other 7,000 facilities and use that money to then go to that program that she suggested. I think that's perfect.
Doesn't exist right now, but should.
Yes.
Should exist. I think that would be fantastic. That is a good start towards getting rid of, all prisons. And, just bringing up the whole, well, what about serial killers and rapists we talked about before? Like, your argument is like rooted in data and just solid. I am like exhausted of hearing that at this point. So, like, my last response to whenever I was asked that was, okay, when's the last time you've seen a serial killer? Like, where's the last serial killer? Like, how? And the only thing that I always will say is, I'm just like, you can go right to RAIN's website. Their statistics come from, all the government organizations, and it is literally like 997 rapists or attempted or alleged. We'll never see one day in jail, let alone prison. So it's we're gonna go ahead and keep incarcerating this high number of people for like a tiny percentage. Like, let's just go ahead and create some sort of, like, I don't know, treatment program that maybe would hopefully work for, people who probably were victimized themselves in the first place, and then, turned around and victimized someone else. I think could have solutions.
There are solutions. People just aren't ready to hear them. Yeah. And I think if you ask me what is the biggest challenge to the prison abolitionist movement, it's that. It's that there are solutions, but people aren't ready to hear them. And so again, I'm going to come back to our cake. You have to preheat the oven. Like, you can't just do all of this. You have to prepare and get it set up to where it would be successful if this is what we did, right? And I think that's a struggle for a lot of people on both sides of the argument,
Is there something that you have seen, maybe like another country, what they do, that you think is a good idea?
Well, I mean, other countries just don't incarcerate people at the same rate that we do. So, I think we can take a cue from that. Stop incarcerating so many people. But Canada actually has a really interesting prison system. They promote education for incarcerated people. They promote things like therapy, and they allocate resources for people in prison for actual like skills training, and not just, like, here's how to write a check or whatever. I mean, it's like skills and education that will then be something that they can take with them once they are released and go back into the community and use that as a way to, ease their transition and to be successful on the outside. So Canada actually does a pretty good job of allocating its resources to in ways that are helpful rather than harmful.
Yeah, that is definitely, I think, we just want to be difficult here and not do the same things.
Well, but we're profiting off of it, and that's the thing. I don't think anything is ever going to change as long as there are still wealthy people profiting off of the incarceration of human beings.
Yes.
How could it?
Okay, so Lorraine asks, do other countries not have as many punitive laws as we do, or do they do something different with sentencing? And I do not know the answer to that. I don't know.
It's yes to both of those. The other countries don't have as punitive laws as we have, and they also don't have super strict sentencing policies like we do. So like again, in Canada, Sweden actually is a really good example. They have an open prison system where it's you don't necessarily spend all of your time incarcerated. There are more opportunities for like it to be in the community during the transition, rather than just like, okay, you've been in here for years and now you're out again, and you don't have any resources or skills. So yeah, the answer to that is yes on both counts. I think in the United States, there's a lot that we could do on the front end, like what Lorraine is talking about on the front end, which for instance would be, for instance, decriminalizing drug use, like other countries do. It is an incredibly punitive thing that we do, where we have decided that certain drugs are okay, but other certain types of drugs are not okay. And again, I can speak to the history of where all of that came from, which really started with Nixon and then really went haywire with Reagan. And Bill Clinton is a huge perpetrator of that as well. So don't think I'm picking on Republicans, because I'm not. A lot of the Democrats are real problematic, and a big reason why our criminal justice system is so awful. But I think decriminalizing drugs would be a huge step forward in just reducing the prison population. Then we can stop, worrying about that particular aspect of it. One thing I tell my students in terms of this drug thing is, and this always blows their minds, like it's that moment where you see light bulbs go off, and I say, there are people incarcerated right now in the United States for life, on a life sentence, for committing a crime that is now legal in the state where they are serving a life sentence, and that is possession of a certain amount of marijuana. It's legal. If someone did the exact thing that they did 10 years ago, if they did it today, that exact crime, they would not get a life sentence. And yet we still have these people serving life sentences. And so we also need to look at the people who are currently incarcerated, what they're incarcerated for, and whether or not it's still pertinent to keep them behind bars.
Right. And the fact that we don't look at what their punishment, is, and does it need to be changed? Have things been updated since this person was sentenced? Like, no, we're just gonna keep it all the way it is. Debbie brings up, she wants to know if the recidivism rates are significantly lower in other countries such as Canada.
Hi, Debbie. They are lower. Recidivism rates honestly are lower because of fewer issues in terms of people violating on technicalities. So if we could reduce the issues of the amount of technicalities and fines and fees and things that people have to pay once they're released, when they're on parole or probation, if we could reduce the amount of continually punitive things that we continue to pile on top of them even after they're released, it would significantly reduce the recidivism rate. Fewer people will go back to prison because there are fewer ways that they could technically violate the conditions of their probation or parole. So yes, the answer is yes to that.
That's a good one. That is definitely some good questions. So really, what do you think, and this obviously is not a question that is really about like the reform versus abolition movement, but what could people do who want to help support incarcerated folks? Like, what can they do in real life? What do you think is a good idea?
It's a good question. I think they need to make sure that they really look into the politicians that they're electing to office, not just on the national level, but local politics, I think is so important, and people don't get how important it is. When there's a ballot and you're like, oh, there's a judge that you can vote for or whatever, and everybody's just like, okay, yeah, sure, whatever, and you don't really research it. Actually research it. Research who your local politicians are, research who is on your ballot, research not just what they say and not just what campaign they're running, but the history of what they have done with their money, what types of causes they have supported. If it's someone who has already been in office before, what bills have they sponsored, what bills have they supported, things like that, and really understand their track record before you just vote for somebody because you think that what they're saying sounds good or it's just going to be different from what we currently have. Another thing I would suggest is you can, every single person here today can go to their local jail and ask for a tour. You can do that. Your tax dollars are paying for that jail, have paid for that jail to exist. They're probably going to hate me at J. Rubin Long, but go there and ask, like, hey, what are your programs here? What are some ways I can volunteer? They have all kinds of volunteer programs. I know the director of programs there personally, and there's all kinds of ways that people can help out. You just actually have to put one foot in front of the other and go there and do the work. And I think a lot of people want a quick and easy way to do it. The quickest and easiest way is to research who you're voting for and vote the right people into office. But sometimes the real work happens when you have to get your hands dirty and actually go do the work on the ground.
Yeah, I don't know if I am, I'm sure I'm not alone here, but whenever I see like the local news stations, or I see like the Myrtle Beach or Horry County like police departments on Facebook, or I even like I see like the solicitor's page or something, and they're like sharing these people and they're like their mugshots, and then they're sharing like, well, we convicted this person today and 15-year sentence for this or that, and I'm just like, I am super disgusted that this stuff is being put on the internet, like on social media. Like, I understand, obviously, they have people's, their arrests and whatnot on their website. Like, how else do you find people who are being held, whatever. But the fact that it's being like plastered on Instagram and Facebook really just doesn't sit right with me. And I think that is a part of us not viewing people who have been arrested or convicted as equal human beings. I do not. I just
I completely agree with you. One of the things that like gets me literally enraged is when you go to a gas station and they have that stack of little newspapers and it's just the mugshots. It's like just the police blotter basically, and it's got people's mugshots in it, the crime that they did, and it's like, it's just truly putting people who did something, or not even did something that we know of, but were arrested for doing something, have not yet been convicted of a crime, right? Putting them on display as a form of the spectacle for the rest of us to consume as entertainment. That is gross. Like, think about yourself, when you're doing that. My students, again, get really mad at me because I ruin all their favorite shows. Like, all the lockdown prison shows. I'm like, please don't watch that. Like, you're literally consuming other people's misfortune for your entertainment, and that is a problem. The show Cops was so disgusting and awful, and I couldn't be happier that it's off the air, and again, I think this kind of plays into that idea that, there's serial killers all around us. You're going to think there's more crime actually happening if you constantly see it on the internet, in the little newspapers at the gas station, on the TV. So I think that really does contribute to this, to exactly what you said, this mindset that we see people who have committed crimes or have even just been arrested for crimes as not equal to us. And that's a real issue.
Yeah. And it's just gross. I don't know how anyone can look at it and just like okay, yeah, that's cool, whatever. No, I don't know. I
think it's because they haven't really had to. They haven't been challenged to think differently yet. I think everyone is capable of looking at things from multiple perspectives. I don't think the guy on the internet right now putting the angry react on this video is incapable of understanding what we're talking about. I think people are scared when they don't get something, and a natural reaction to fear is anger. And I think that's where we get some of that. And so you see people saying, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. Well, stop before those words come out of your mouth. Stop for 1 second and really consider the circumstances of that particular person that you're saying that about or to. And then think about a moment in your life again where you did something that you haven't been super proud of.
Mhm. Oh, but they think, well, if I changed, like I have grown as a person, like I
Mhm.
would never do that again. Okay, well, you don't know what this person's thinking or like what went on in their head or even like what led to that,
Exactly.
situation to happen in the first place.
Mm.
Um, Changing people's minds and changing their hearts is like not my forte. I get super frustrated. And yeah, I'm a lot better like writing the emails that
Mhm.
like promote these and whatnot than I am at actually talking to talking to people. I don't know who believes in like astrology here who's watching, but I am like a full on Taurus and I have a
That's
so
awesome.
yeah. Um
Well, I'm the opposite. I'm actually great at doing that. Thank God I'm a teacher.
uh-huh.
But I suck at the rest of it. Like my research and writing is not my forte, but I love being able to really use statistics like what we just used tonight, from the FBI, from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the Bureau of Prisons, and literally just teach facts. And I don't even have to do it in a way that's super convincing because the facts are what they are.
Mhm.
And if anyone is in college, or in any educational setting, for me, the goal would be to learn things. And so if your mind is open and you just look at the statistics and look at how we're able to analyze them in a way that might challenge the way that you previously thought, I think that is an excellent first step. And I commend anyone who's willing to do that for themselves. I think that is a true sign of intelligence,
Yeah,
is admitting that I don't know everything.
right.
So let me listen to people who study this for a living.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, Lorraine just said that you realize believing facts is a lost art.
I'm a college professor. I know. It's like my
Oh.
office is like you know, I don't know. I try really hard. I
Yeah,
try hard.
yeah. No, I mean, I feel like the college kids who are taking your class or who are majoring in sociology or like maybe psychology even too, have to be open to this. Why else are you majoring in it? Like
Right.
what do you want to do with your future that has you taking these courses and this is your major, but you don't want to change your opinion
Hmm.
on
Hmm.
something.
Well, and I actually think that's an interesting point is, I've been teaching sociology and criminology for 15 years, and I've had many hundreds, thousands of students come through my classrooms, many of whom have gone on to become corrections officers in prisons and police officers. They take my criminology classes for that reason, is because that's their career goal. I've also got students who became lawyers and did other things, right, in terms of the law and the legal side of it. But for my students who become correctional officers or probation and parole officers, police officers, I think having that background of factual, scientific, rigorous, academic, scholarly information, to take with them when they go do that job, that is truly the best way that I can prepare them, for what they're going to have to do in the course of their occupation. They are better because they know, the stuff that they learned in their college classes about the statistics and about the reality, and the history too of our corrections and criminal justice system. They're better at their job, because they're able to empathize more with the people that they're dealing with on a daily basis. So it's my little slice of the world that I just try to put out there and hope that they take something with them that that they can use later.
Well, I think we are all better for having you in that position because
Wow.
you were very well suited to do it.
Thank you.
So we're going to end on this last question that I actually just thought of while we were discussing, policing children. we'll talk about cancel culture really quickly.
Oh, good. Okay.
I have come across an interesting perspective on cancel culture. And I, maybe a couple years ago thought that it was, an actual thing. I necessarily don't agree with it anymore. I don't think it's real in the sense of like celebrities, because you see there's no real consequences for, especially like the white men who may have done something awful. They're not, really being held accountable. People are outraged online for a few days and then it just goes away and they still have a job, right? But what was interesting to me and what was brought up and what I tend to agree with now is like in our community, in our relationships with each other, people who make like slip ups or like, maybe like an unintended error in something that they say or do, pretty much it was like we're policing each other and we're not allowing for growth within like the academic activism organizing realm of things.
Yep.
What do you think about that?
Wait, so you think that we are policing each other really in this, like we are censoring or not
censoring, but kind of like looking for like perfection out of people.
Oh yeah.
Not allowing for, like mistakes, whether they were intentional mistakes or not. It's been compared to like us policing each other.
Yeah.
So like, if someone did something or said something inappropriate, and then the backlash that might happen to that.
Oh, I mean, everybody says or does something that they literally the second it comes out of their mouth, they instantly regret it. I can't tell you how many times I have. And if I got held to an incredibly high, unreachable standard, I don't think I'd have a job. We are human, and we have to be able to recognize that about each other, is that no one person has all the answers. No one person is right all the time. And we can only better ourselves by listening to a multitude of voices and perspectives. And when we don't do that, then we isolate ourselves in our own little circle of the world, and we start to resent other people. And we start, and I don't just mean this on one side of the political spectrum. I mean it on both sides, because I've absolutely have liberal left-leaning friends who truly are very content to exist in their echo chamber, where they all just bounce the same ideas back and forth off of each other, and nobody ever really gets out of that. So if you're not getting out of that, then you're not learning anymore. And that's a real problem, because then that does create a situation where people expect perfection from each other, but also believe that they can't be wrong. And that's really dangerous, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I mean, I definitely see your point in that. I don't know what the solution would be other than like, I don't know, just.
Yeah. And so I guess it kind of, you see it in like the online spaces, like especially. So if someone is not like super online, they may not like see this happen as often, but it's kind of just like used to be called like call out culture, and then it was cancel culture. But yeah, one of my acquaintances brought it up as like, well, we're policing each other, like, and not allowing room for growth. And that, I guess, brings it to is like restorative or transformative justice, then I don't know that we should be like canceling another human.
Right. Yes. I think I think you're right. You cut out for just a second. I didn't hear that whole part, but I think one of the biggest, signs of emotional and intellectual, ability is to be able to say, I was wrong about that thing.
Yeah.
To say, I really thought it was this way for a very long time. But now I recognize that it's not that way. And so I am capable of changing my way of thinking. That's kind of what you did with cancel culture, right? Like you started this question with that premise that, I used to think this way. But someone said something and now I can see it a little bit differently. That's the only way that we can grow and become better and more intelligent. Yeah. I fully admit when I don't know something. I think that's important too, especially if you're an educator, actually. I think it's okay to let your students see that you aren't a god. You don't know everything, right? So if a student asks me a question and I don't know the answer, I literally say, I don't know the answer to that, but let me see if I can find the answer for you and I'll tell you next time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we are fallible and it's okay to be, as long as we're willing to do the work of educating ourselves about the thing we didn't know about.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's perfect. I definitely feel like that there needs to be room for that. And I think a lot of like the organizing, activism, academic spaces online are moving towards like the whole transformative and restorative like justice principles, which I think is fantastic because that perfectly aligns with what we are trying to do, as far as, you know, like capital punishment and the prison industrial complex. So it all goes together very nicely.
Definitely.
Debbie said thank you, and that it was a great discussion and she learned, you know, lots of information from you. So really, we are right on time to wrap up. I am so thankful that you joined us. I'm going to go ahead and drop the books that you were a part of in the comments because I was looking at it earlier and I'm like, okay, I need to read this. It needs to be on my like to be read list, which is never ending, obviously. But let us know if you do anything else because I feel like there's a lot that you could be writing about.
Well, Ashlyn, now that you mention it, there may be something coming down the pipeline soon that perhaps we could have another GSAT conversation about, and I will keep you abreast of that situation. But until then, if anybody who is watching this either tonight or you're watching it in the future, like, hi, future people, and you want the information that I gave out tonight, you want the sources, just email me, and I will be more than happy to do that. My email is my name, jenny.schlosser@gmail. So feel free to email me, and I will give you every source, every link, every piece of statistics that we talked about tonight. I'm more than happy to do that. But thank you so much for having me on the show again. It was awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I will definitely have you back on soon because in our discussion, I literally had a bunch of wheels turning for other things that we could discuss within the same thing. Also adding in like the whole school issue that relates to, you know, how we are a carceral society. So
100%.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your night and everybody, thank you for watching. Bye.